Welcome to my lecture 4, which is continuation of applications of radioisotopes in agriculture and food technology. And this part now deals with preservation. So the earlier part, the three lectures, you might have seen the contribution of the Department of Atomic Energy and use of radiation in improving crop varieties and getting better yield. Uh, and the second part is the contribution which are related to uh, preservation of food, how to extend the shelf life and achieve various other objectives uh, in food preservation. Now, food is a very important component of living life or the life on this planet. It's important for everyone. So it's a basic necessity for sustaining life of any kind on Earth. Um, Other thing is the term you might have heard is of food security, which is actually nothing but availability of food to the masses, general public, and that too at affordable prices. So that is what is meant by food security. It should be available in uh, abundance and also should be available at affordable prices. Uh, we have this Food Safety and Standards Act 2006, uh, and where food has been defined very clearly as food, which means any substance, whether processed, partially processed, or unprocessed, which is intended for human consumption and includes primary food to the extent defined in clause ZK. So there is a clause there which defines what food is. Uh, but there is something called primary food, and primary food in clause ZK means an article of food being a produce of agriculture, horticulture, animal husbandry, dairy, aquaculture, in its natural form, resulting from the growing, raising, cultivation, picking, harvesting, collection, or catching in the hands of a person other than a farmer or fisherman. So, you see how clearly the law has kept farmer and fishermen out of this uh, law or this act. So, as long as the food is with farmer or a fisherman as a catch in the hand of a fisherman, it is not amenable to the rules which are made under this FSS Act 2006. Actually, there are Food Safety and Standards Act rules and regulations which were made in 2011. There are certain foods like genetically modified or engineered food or food containing such ingredients uh, in infant food, packaged drinking water, alcoholic drink, chewing gum, and any substance, including water, used into the food during its manufacture, preparation, or treatment. So everything falls under this. So including irradiated food fall uh, under this act. Does not include any animal feed, live animals, unless they are prepared or processed for placing on the market for human consumption. So it also includes animal feed. It doesn't include animal feed or live animals which are on hoof, which are actually mobile, uh, and plants prior to harvesting, or drugs or medicinal products, cosmetics, narcotics, psychotropic substances, even though they are taken through oral route, but they will not be included as food. So currently, feed is out of the scope of these act rules, but feed is very important in food chain, and many of the contaminants or toxins might be coming through animal feed. So there is a proposal of including feed and such substances also in the act. So these are things which are going on. Also, provided that central government may declare by notification in the official gazette any other article as food, for the purpose of this act. So, as I've told you, for example, animal feed or cattle feed is one such thing which may be falling under this act if government wants. Now, irradiated food are also part of this act and the rules made there under. There is a section called Section 22, which has genetically modified foods, organic food, functional foods, proprietary foods, etc. And it says, save as otherwise provided under this act and regulations made thereunder, no person shall manufacture, distribute, sell, or import any novel food, genetically modified articles of food, irradiated food, organic foods, foods for special dietary uses, functional foods, nutraceuticals, health supplements, proprietary food, and such other articles of foods which the central government may notify in this behalf. So what it says is you cannot sell it, but if government wants these foods to be sold, then there have to be regulations which have to be uh, you know met, or they have to be satisfied, and therefore for all these foods uh, there are separate regulations which have been made, and we'll come to it later on, but irradiated foods are right now very much part of the Food Safety and Standard Act rules. Now, coming to the need for preservation is very important, because there is a lot of food spoilage that you might have also seen around you. As per FAO and United Nations Environmental Program, nearly 30% of the world's agricultural land, consuming an amount of water nearly three times the volume of Lake Geneva, grows foods that is lost or wasted. So you can imagine how much food is wasted and how much water which goes into making this food is wasted, and uh, it has huge environmental impact too. In India, 20 to 50% of the agriculture produce is lost every year due to inadequate post-harvest practices. This waste is also responsible for nearly 8% of the total world greenhouse gas emissions, and nearly 14% of the total greenhouse gas emission from agriculture. So it's again huge. 8% of the total greenhouse gases are attributed to the food which is lost, and 14% of the total GHG emission from agriculture. So this is a huge, colossal loss that every year we undergo. Its economic loss as well loss to environment. Besides that, we have high rate of population growth, rapid urbanization and industrialization, depletion of land and water resources, uncertain agroclimatic conditions, and inadequate post-harvest storage practices. So these are some of the additional factors which make impact food losses and food preservation. Now there are several agents of food spoilage. Of course, there are larger pests like rodents and things like that, but where irradiation or other treatment may not have much control. But what can be controlled is spoilage by say insects and microbes, and here you see, or say physiological spoilage. Now, if you look at the spoilage which is caused by insects, now, agricultural commodities are always, if you get any agriculture commodity at hand, will always be contaminated with certain eggs of storage insects, which you may not see. What you can see is probably, if those eggs have hatched because of conducive conditions of temperature and humidity, they may develop into adults. And these are the adults, or even the larvae, which are before say stage one stage below adult. These larvae and adult, which you can see, they eat into these food material. Now, adult insects eat the commodity and also deposit uric acid as their excreta. So, when these adults are growing, they produce uric acid, and therefore you can see, whenever a food or a grain is infected with insects, it has a typical odor with which you can make out that whether it is a old grain, because you can smell the presence of uric acid in it, severely affecting the quality of food material and often making it unfit for human consumption. So many times people remove these insects and larvae and have to consume this food, but it is not advisable to use such material which is already contaminated with adult insects and larvae. Then there are quarantine pests. Now, quarantine pests are actually they use the food as their say for propagating their life forms or as their food. Now, for example, fruit flies or certain weevils, which normally you may not see in good fruits, but they are there. For example, there are uh, weevils inside the stone of mango, which may come out and start feeding into it. So, as a result, these foods become unfit for consumption. But more than that, there is a stage when you don't right away see them, but if they reach a country where these pests are not there, then they can grow and spoil uh, the vegetation in that country. So all those countries, they impose restrictions on movement of many of the food products, especially fresh fruits and vegetables, getting into a country where they don't want to introduce uh, the life forms coming from the country of their origin. So countries have very strict quarantine regulations. So, for example, fruit flies, thrips, mites on fresh fruits and vegetables, cut flowers, and other plant materials are likely to be infested with these kind of insect pests. So, no agricultural commodity or plant material could be shipped abroad unless it meets the quarantine requirement of the importing country. Besides insects, the major groups are microbes, and in microbes there are fungi which affect appearance and taste, produce also mycotoxins. So fungi have dual um, issues. One is that they also spoil, but uh, produce a lot of mycotoxins in it, and which may cause unknown health hazards to people who consume these fungal infested foods. There are yeasts which cause fermentation in many foods, and therefore you have this fermenting odors into it, affect flavor and taste. There are several bacteria which may grow in food material and cause putrid, rancid, or fermented odors due to degradation of proteins, fats, and other components of foods. Also produce bacterial toxins, and they also cause spoilage. And many times the spores of bacteria which are not easily heat killed. So in subthermally processed products or cans, they may cause bloating of cans and spoilage of food. So these are the major groups of organisms which are targeted by food irradiation. Now, spoilage is one part which is very important. The other part is the foodborne illnesses. Many microorganisms are responsible for causing foodborne illnesses, and there are, of course, two types of foodborne illnesses. One which cause infection, and other which cause intoxication. So infections are when microorganisms grow inside the intestine, and after they grow in large number, there are infections like diarrhea, dysentery, and typhoid happening. Uh, Besides that, many microorganisms, they produce toxins in food material. For example, Clostridium botulinum toxin or botuline, Staph aureus toxins are there in many food products if they are not handled and prepared and kept at room temperature, not properly stored. So these microorganisms may produce, or bacteria particularly in this case, produce some toxins, and which may be harmful uh, to human beings who consume them. Besides bacteria causing infections and intoxications, you may have parasites and protozoa, which are actually higher organisms, but they exist as cysts in many of the uh, food material, especially in case of foods which have not been handled uh, properly, or which have not been handled properly, or in certain meat and meat products or fish, they, they may carry certain protozoa and parasites in their intestine or in their liver, or sometimes in the muscles of higher animals, which may pass on to the person if these foods are not properly cooked, or if they have not been treated to get rid of these parasites and protozoa. Now, I'm leaving here another group of microorganisms which may contaminate food, which are viruses. And I'm particularly, uh, leaving it because radiation requirement for inactivation of viruses are very high, and most of the viruses are killed very easily by heat treatment. But certainly now these questions are being asked in relation to, say, coronavirus. Coronavirus can be killed by radiation, uh, and there are experiments to show that on surfaces, if you use high dose irradiation, you may get rid of it. But for those foods where doses are very low, which cannot tolerate higher doses, it may not inactivate many viruses. So one can combine small doses of heat with radiation and get rid of the viruses very easily. Now, need to process food arise because of two reasons. One is the perishable nature of food, and that's very important, because if food was so durable, we could have kept it. There would not have been much problem. But most of the food products, especially those uh, food materials which have a higher moisture levels, they are much more uh, amenable to perishability. So perishable nature of food depends on the type of food, the biochemistry and physiology of that food material, the bioburden that it has, the organisms or insects, eggs which it carries, the storage temperatures on which the food is kept, uh, and also how the food is handled from right from, say, its harvesting to its processing stage, the physical damage that might occur, the processing, how you process, how you package becomes important. And when food is perishable, it is also accompanied by so many other problems. If food is perishable, when you cannot preserve perishable food, it threatens food security. You cannot carry food from its production center to consumption center. Uh, Many times, it is loss of quality if some microorganisms grow on it, or some fungi grow on it. You may lose the quality, nutrition, also safety. If you consume some food which is already contaminated, it threatens food safety, threatens biosecurity. That's why quarantine treatment is required, because if many of these microbes or insect pests, they grow on this food, they use it as food material. But if you transmit them or transfer them as a part of trade, then it may threaten biosecurity of another country, another place, affects trade. Then there are this, also the price stability is very important. part which is related to the perishability of food. So cycles of glut and scarcity are mostly related to the perishable nature of the product, uh, because it returns. You cannot store food for a longer time. Farmers have to sell food at a lower rate to get rid of it. Therefore, the growers may not get good returns. Instability of food is also because food is perishable, and of course there are related economic losses. So this is not new. The perishability was known to people since organized food production started, and there was not that hunter-gatherer mode of food consumption changed. Earlier people used to do the same day hunting and eat, or same day find something and eat. But then when organized cultivation started, the agrarian uh, economies started growing, then they realized that it is important to preserve food, and since time immemorial, some of the uh, conventional methods were developed. For example, sun drying, which is still practiced almost all around the world, using salt as a uh, preserving medium, using sugar as a preserving medium. Then people also brought in fermentation, because many of the fermented products were found to be good for health, and as a result you saw, for example, uh, curd and some other fermented drinks uh, which were discovered. So fermentation became one of the method of preserving food, keeping it for longer time. Then heating came into being, and heating is currently the major part. The thermal treatment for preservation of food is practiced in a big way today. But only problem with heating is that uh, the original form and texture of food is no longer uh, there. It changes its form and texture. Although heating has several advantages, uh, in many times food becomes more tasty, or it has better flavors after heating than without it. So there are good advantages as well as some of the disadvantages with heating, but it permanently changes the original form and texture of food material. Then refrigeration and freezing, which are again quite prevalent all around the globe, and in certain country very well established freezing or cold chains have been established. In India also this coming up, and this is a major mode of preserving food in its original form, the way you want. You can keep it. Then some chemical methods have been used, especially to get rid of insects and bacteria. For example, fumigation with methyl bromide, ethylene dibromide uh, is very common. Phosphide is another very important fumigant which is used in godowns. Uh, but there are problems with fumigants. They leave harmful residues on food. They are also hazardous to environment. As you can see, methyl bromide or ethylene dibromide, they are halogenated hydrocarbons. They react with ozone, and therefore they are uh, they are ozone depleting agent, and therefore they are being phased out. But still, some amount is still being used around the world, although they were to be phased out by, I think, 2015. But still, I think it's a long way. Uh, Now, we will come to the radiation technology in particular, which is the subject of today's lecture. Now, again, radiation. We have a long spectrum, as you can see, right from radio waves, microwaves, infrared, visible, ultraviolet, X-rays, gamma rays. And if you see, some of these uh, are purely non-ionizing. For example, visible light or infrared or microwave, ultraviolet. These are non-ionizing, but still they are being used in some way or the other in food industry. But we are not going to talk about application of non-ionizing radiation in this lecture, but only of ionizing radiations. Because we know that ionizing radiations have a lot of advantages over non-ionizing ones in terms of their high energy associated with short wavelengths, and also their deep penetration into material, so that their effectiveness is far more than say ultraviolet light or visible light. And also, in case of infrared or microwaves, there is a increase in temperature associated with these radiations, which again uh, complicates the matter. And we are uh, when we are using ionizing radiation, this is basically a non-thermal treatment. And when we are talking of ionizing radiation, we are talking basically the use of gamma rays or electrons, accelerated electrons, or X-rays. And if we are saying gamma rays, we are using uh, just two sources of radioisotopes, sources of gamma rays. One is cesium-137, which has 0.66 million electron volt of energy associated with its gamma rays, and cobalt 60, which is around 1.33 million electron volts of energy, and electrons of 10 million electron volts, and X-rays 5 or 7.5 million electron volts of energy are used. Uh, Doses could be, anyway from few kilograys, few grays rather, to 25 kilograys. And as I told you in the previous lecture, 1 gray is 1 joule of energy absorbed in 1 kilogram of material. One thing which is mm, very important to tell public in general is that any exposure to ionizing radiation uh, of uh, food when it is exposed to ionizing radiation in the doses um, given here, and the energies which are given, in fact, these are the legal limits of energy. No radioactivity is induced in food materials because of their nature of their atoms and the energies which are used in this uh, the processing. Once again, here, for example, gamma rays from cobalt 60, it gives two photons, 1.33 and 1.17. Cesium 137, 0.66 MeV, accelerated electrons 10 MeV, X-ray rays when electrons are converted, uh, you know, and they are converted using X-ray converters, which could be tungsten or any high Z element can give you X-ray, uh, but normally tungsten is used. And energies could be 5 or 7.5 MeV. In fact, our regulations permit up to 7.5 MeV if we are using tungsten as converter material. Now, coming to the applications of radiation processing, uh, just for ease of knowing what we are doing, all everything depends on the dose, and it's the dose which actually gives you a required technical advantage. So we have divided these applications into three types. uh, One is, for example, low dose applications when doses given are less than 1 kilogram. um, And when you apply such doses, you can achieve certain physiological benefits in certain food materials. For example, it can inhibit sprouting in potatoes and onion. Doses around say 100 to 200 gray are used for inhibition of sprouting in potato and onion. It can delay the ripening in certain fruits and vegetables. The senescence in vegetables is reduced. Ripening of say uh, bananas and mangoes is delayed. Insect infestation in stored grains, pulses, and their products like atta, besan, and suji. It can be achieved under these, one less than 1 kilogram doses. Destruction of parasites in meat and meat products. The parasites I was talking about, some of the parasites like liver fluke or ascaris or certain helminths. These are, tape bombs, for example. They can be easily killed applying, say, around 1 kilogram dose. Then we go to medium dose applications, which are applications between, say, 1 kilogram to 10 kilogram. Uh, these are typically, applications which are used in pasteurization or equivalent of pasteurization. That means elimination of spoilage microbes in fresh fruits, meat, and poultry, elimination of food pathogens uh, in meat and poultry. So you can get rid of both spoilage um, organisms, as well as you can get rid of uh, all pathogens there. So basically, it takes care of all pathogens, but spoilage organisms may not be totally eliminated. Some spore forms may remain there. Excuse me. So, as in pasteurization, for example, pasteurization of milk takes care of most of the pathogens, but still, milk can be spoiled because though some of the spoilage organisms are killed, but there are, it's not totally sterilizing the product. So some organisms will be found there which eventually will spoil things, but it will certainly remove pathogens um, from the picture. Also, around 10 kilogram we can achieve hygienization of spices and herbs. So when you give a dose of 10 kilogram, you almost get rid of most of the microbes, but still it is not a sterile product. There will be organisms, maybe 100 to 1000 microbes per gram of material may still be there around. So that's why the process is called hygienization. It can also be achieved around 10 kilogram of dose. Then there are applications which are above 10 kilogram, and these applications are normally used on food materials for achieving sterilization. Uh, Almost getting rid of all microbial activity there, and you can get shelf stable foods without refrigeration in such products. You don't have to, for example, in certain ready to eat products, if you are sterilizing at high doses, even meat products at high doses at low temperature, you can keep these for a long time, maybe 2 to 3 years, and many of these products are used for preparing rations for astronauts. So these are sterile products, shelf stable products. So, what radiation processing can do is it can do several things. If you see this slide, which is very common and it was prepared in BRC, but you can see it on the internet now. Uh, it's available to everyone. Now we can say that it is one process which has multiple uses. So you can see depending on the dose, if you are using very small dose, maybe around 100 to 200 gray, you can get sprout inhibition in onion, potato, ginger, garlic, virtually um, any crop which is susceptible to germination, where sprouting is a problem, where there is quick sprouting at high temperature and high humidity. There you can apply small doses, and you know, reduce, in fact, totally inhibits sprouting. Then on the other side, you have fruits, for example, banana, mangoes, and things like that. You can actually irradiate again around say 400 to 500 gray, even less, in some cases, maybe 300 to 500 gray. You can have multiple benefits. Not only you can delay the ripening in these fruits and vegetables, you can also kill the quarantine insect pests in fruits. So quarantine doses are less than 1 kilogram, and mostly, for example, export of mangoes to US uh, has approved 400 gray treatment. So if the USDA has approved 400 gray, one can also use lower doses. It can get rid of all quarantine insect pests, including the weevil which is there in the stone, as well as the fruit flies which are there on the fruits. Besides, it can delay the ripening in these fruits. Um, then I told you that the other important application is insect disinfestation, which is in case of cereals, pulses, and dry fruits. Virtually in any uh, material, if you want to get rid of insect pests, irradiation is the most effective treatment. Shelf life extension of chicken, meat, fish. So it's the actually the pasteurization of all meat and meat products. You can get rid of the pathogens as well as extend the shelf life at the recommended storage temperature. Hygienization of spices and flesh foods again is another. So you can do several things by manipulating doses. Sorry. Now, again, working mode is same as I told you in the mutation breeding lecture, where one can achieve ionization, ejecting electrons from atoms, and those electrons actually directly affect the uh, DNA by depositing the energy on DNA and other large molecules like RNA and proteins. And the other effect is through indirect effect, where water molecules are ionized or radiolysis of water is um, carried out by these electrons, and so you get different types of radicals and ions which indirectly affect these molecules which are important for growth of these microbes and insects, and that's how these microbes insects are killed, or the uh, inhibition of sprouting takes place or delay in ripening takes place. It's basically because of these two, direct and indirect effect. Effects happening because of radiolysis of water, which the radicals created there, like hydrogen radical, hydroxyl radical, superoxide radical, or the aqueous, all they indirectly affect the um, chemistry of the molecules which are there, and the direct effect by direct deposition of energy on the molecule and causing changes in DNA, as I told you in the earlier lectures. So mode of working is same, but in this case the target is the um, the problematic insects which are there, which could be storage insects or quarantine insects. It could be the microbes, which could be fungi, or yeast, or bacteria, or they can be parasites like helminths or protozoa. So those are the target, and that's how they get killed in the food material. At the doses which we recommend for treatment of food, the food material itself doesn't change its characters as much. That's why those doses are important. So we see to it that the doses which are applied to the food material don't change the characters or consumer requirement of these food material. Eventually, these foods are going to be processed and consumed. So, there are no issues related to safety. But I'll come to that aspect little later. So, what are the advantages of radiation processing of food? It's a physical, non-additive process causing minimal change in food. That's very important. It keeps the nature of food intact. It doesn't impact the nature of food because it's a non-thermal treatment. It's highly effective compared to chemicals and fumigants, does not leave harmful residues in food, can be applied to bulk as well as pre-packaged food. That's very important advantage of irradiation. That is, you can have the final packed product. You don't have to open and expose the product, so you can pack the product. Even primary packing, you can put it number of packages in a secondary carton, and even in a big master carton, you can keep these and get irradiated, as long as your conveyor and system is designed in a way that it can handle these loads. It's a cold process, preserves food in natural form, does not destroy heat labile aroma constituents of food. So again, very important thing, like in spices, normally heating would take away the aroma constituents, but irradiation, being a cold process, the aroma of spices or of any other food will remain intact. The process is safe to workers and friendly to environment. So, since irradiation is done in a very safe kind of irradiators which are approved by Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, and most of the irradiation is done remotely through several after taking into account all the safety features, and will prevent any exposure of a personal working personnel in the plant. So all that, with those safety mechanisms, there is hardly any report of any overexposure to a worker. And also, as I told you, you can get rid of it. Any irradiation plant does not emit any pollutant into the environment, gaseous or liquid. So it's very safe. Of course, there are limitations of the technology in related to that. You cannot pick up any food and irradiate and use the technology, because you have to actually um, see the amenability of any food. So you have to do some experiments in food in the laboratory to test the kind of doses which can be administered to a food material. That means whether food can tolerate that kind of dose for which you are applying a radiation, and you have to work out a good I think a good dose and effect combination to to arrive at a right combination of dose and effects for any food material. So once you have done that experiment, then you have to scale it up in a facility, and then you have to standardize other process parameters. As I told you, in case of um say if you are thinking of viruses to be inactivated, I told you may require higher doses, because viruses are literally a very small and dry material. So you may need very high doses to inactivate them. uh, and at low doses they may not be destroyed, but small use of heat treatment will take care of it. So that is another thing. Other part is, it is also said that it is capital intensive, because you have to actually put in some amount of money. It is not a machine that you can buy and carry out irradiation. So you have to set up a plant which may um, need some capital and some land resources for setting up. So there is a cost associated with it. These are some of the limitations. Now, I'll just tell you something internationally, how things have moved since the discovery of X-rays in 19. 1895 and say radioactivity in 1896. In 1904, the first studies were carried out in MIT where Samuel Prescott, who found that radiation are very effective in getting rid of bacteria. Immediately after this discovery in 1906, a patent was sought in UK for using radioactive isotopes to irradiate food by Appleby and Banks. In 18, a US patent to use X-rays for preservation of food was granted. In 1921, they found that trichinella in food, which is a parasite, can be eliminated with radiation. In 1930, there was a French patent on food irradiation. In again 1943, a lot of interest was generated on food preservation using radiation by U.S. Army. So U.S. Army funded a big study at MIT in 1943 for looking at the food preservation aspect of radiation processing. Uh, in fact, in 1951, U.S. Atomic Energy Commission got in and started to coordinate these national research activities. In 1958, there was a first commercial irradiation facility which was started in Stuttgart in Germany, which failed later on because of several reasons. Because there were a problem of getting radioisotopes with competent prices, and the economics. Because of economics, this facility was closed. In 1970, there was a big program called International Food Irradiation Project, which was started in Federal Research Center for Food Preservation in Karlsruhe in Germany. So this was actually a lot of work was done at this place, and a lot of safety studies were done related to irradiated food. And um, a lot of data around the world was generated on the safety of radiation processed foods. This data was actually studied by a committee called Joint Expert Committee on Food Irradiation, or JECFI, of FAO, IAEA, and WHO. So this was actually spearheaded by IAEA, FAO, and World Health Organization, and they found that there is no safety concerns, and but they were still conservative and allowed irradiation up to 10 kilogram of dose. Later on, of course, in '83, the IFIP, that is this German facility, was closed down because all the end were achieved. Whatever it was set for was achieved, so they closed down this facility. But then in 1983, Codex Alimentarius Commission came into picture, and they actually drafted the standards, which are called General Standards for Irradiated Foods at 10 kilogram. So this was, like when this Codex General Standards were made for radiation processing of food, this opened it up for the rest of the world, use of this radiation without any inhibition. In 1984, there was an international consultative group on food irradiation, uh, which was actually formed at IAEA, and which was successor to this Karlsruhe facility called IFIP. Uh, in '98, European Commission also, agreed to allow irradiation for eight categories of foods. Then in '97, again a committee was formed by FAO, IAEA, WHO, which was a joint study group, which looked at the safety of high dose irradiation and recommended the lifting any upper dose limit. This earlier it was said that 10 kilogram dose should be the limit for application for food irradiation. But this committee recommended that there should not be any upper limit. If required, one can use higher doses, and that opened up for application of higher doses, especially for sterilization of food material, giving more than 10 kilogram. In fact, NASA or some of the studies at MIT showed that even application up to 45 kilogram dose does not uh, does not affect uh, the safety aspect of food material. Then I'll also touch upon some Indian milestones, and as you can see here, it was 1954 that R&D in atomic energy began in India. Around 1958, there was this work on food irradiation started in India. Basically, the work till this point of time was being carried out using a reactor. At that time, we had Cyrus reactor, and with the commissioning of Cyrus reactor, work started on effect of looking at effect of radiation on living materials, plant materials, including food. In 1967, there was this setting up of food irradiation processing laboratory and a food package irradiator at Bhabha Atomic Research Center. In 1974, there was a big commercial scale facility set up again at BRC called ISOMED, which was mainly for irradiation of medical products. So these were the two pioneering facilities which were set up by DAE to begin with. In 86, in fact, after seeing this, the first irradiation facility in public domain was set up in Shriram Industrial Institute in Delhi. This SARC irradiator is still functioning. In 2000, first technology demonstration unit for spices and dry ingredients at Navi Mumbai was set up, which is functioning, doing about 30 tons of spices per day. That is the capacity of the plant. Then in 2002, the first technology demonstration unit for agriculture products at Lasalgaon was started by the Food Technology Division, Bhaverton Research Center. And this was the first facility to demonstrate use of radiation technology on agriculture products. And later on, this was approved by US FDA for export of mangoes to US after quarantine treatment. After these, technology demonstration units were set up by DAE. In 2004, this was first private entrepreneur which set up a facility called Organic Green Foods Limited in Kolkata. Thereafter, as I'll tell you later, that we have more than 20 plants uh, which are doing radiation processing. They are set up by private entrepreneurs. As far as regulatory milestones are concerned, and for anything to be carried out in public domain or any processing to be done in public domain, we need very solid regulatory framework behind it. So in 1991, this atomic energy rules were amended, and these were called Atomic Energy Control of Irradiation of Food Rules, which were again amended in 1996. In 1994, we had this Prevention of Food Adulteration Act before the Food Safety and Standards Act came into existence in 2006. This was PFA Act, under which rules were there. So, uh, irradiation of food was included in these rules, and initially they approved for onion, potatoes, and spices, and later on other articles of foods like wheat, atta, rice, and other things were included. In 2003, Ministry of Agriculture also amended quarantine regulations or plant quarantine regulations and included irradiation as a quarantine measure. In 2012, uh, again, a big exercise was done in Food Technology Division, and this all atomic energy radiation processing of uh, food and allied products rules, which replaced earlier 1996 rules. And these were the rules which gave a wider canvas of irradiation, and this was based on the classes. So there were some 8 classes of food products which are actually created and which were recognized around the globe, and radiation doses for different technological objectives were provided in these rules. And after these were published, it took almost 4 years for absorbing these rules in food safety and standards uh, regulations. So currently we have these classes, our atomic energy rules reflected in food safety and standards uh, rules. Now, um, see, now these questions are not asked, but still, for people who are not quite aware of this technology, they always raise this question of safety and wholesomeness. That is, and they were, very pertinent questions to begin with in say 60s, 70s, and even 80s, I would say. But after Codex Alimentarius Commission or IAEA, WHO, FAO cleared it, these questions are not asked. But as I was telling you, there is a lot of data which is there, and even books are there, which endorse the safety of radiation processed food products. There are studies which show no adverse effect reported, for example, related to radiological safety. Whether there will be any induction of uh, radioactivity in food exposed to radiation at the doses which are given and at the energies of the radiation that we use. So there is no evidence of any adverse effects. Safety of chemical changes, there are huge number of studies. Safety of any microbiological changes, the nutritional adequacy, whether it impacts nutrition, and if it impacts, whether that impact will be significant or will be tolerable. And to cap it up, there have been animal feeding studies. There are multi-generation acute as well as chronic animal feeding studies done, and no adverse effects have been seen in several generations of animals. And many of these studies have been done in ERC also. Also, there have been studies on human volunteer. That means human volunteers were fed these food for a number of months, and no adverse effects were seen. In fact, astronauts and cosmonauts have been carrying irradiated food on space missions, so that endorses their safety. Further, the safety has also been endorsed by FAO, IAEA, WHO in 1981, 1994, 1999, Codex Alimentarius Commission in 1983 and 2003, WTO and GATT, World Trade Organization, earlier General Agreement for Tariff and Trade. They allow radiation processing if properly declared, and if it is carried out in facilities which are approved by the importer. IPPC, that is International Plant Protection Convention 2003, USFDA, USDA, APHIS, that is APHIS is Animal Plant Health Inspection Service of US Department of Agriculture, EFSA, that is European Food Safety Authority, many of the professional scientific bodies, International Organization for Standardization, that is ISO, they have all endorsed their safety. So safety is not a question as on today. Now, you know, once again, we would say that. It's a very effective technology. Safety is not an issue. And to top it up, even environment is not an issue. With this technology, it's environment friendly, prevents use of chemicals, leaves no harmful residues, no release of toxic effluents. Um, there's no or low water and carbon footprint of this technology. A very effective alternative to halogenated hydrocarbons used as fumigant, as I told you, that is methyl bromide or ETO. Phosphine, now which is widely used for stored products today, even in our FCI go downs. It actually results in resistance in insects. When you allow phosphine to be used as fumigant in go downs, many of the stored product insects, they actually become resistant to it. And there are 11 species of stored product insects which have been found to be resistant, and they have been found in 45 countries. Is quickly acquired from field population. Also resistance is acquired from field population. But irradiation is very effective. Even if it's a resistant pest to a chemical, it can be irradiated and we can get rid of it. And insects do not develop resistance to radiation. So these are big advantages of using this technology. So I think that's the last slide of my lecture on this, and we will take this forward in my next lecture.